What happens when a man tries to play God? More accurately, what about creating gods that walk on Earth? The answer? Compound V. Based off the Super Soldier Serum that gave Captain America his powers in the Marvel Universe, this blue serum is the root cause for many of the issues that are plaguing the Boysverse at this very moment. And we shouldn't be surprised that that's the case. Compound V is the whole reason Vought exists and is as powerful as it's become. But how exactly does it give people their powers? What are the effects it has on a person? How many versions of it are there? And does the impact go beyond man gets ability to knock buildings down? We'll be answering all those questions and more in this video. So, without further ado, let's get right to it.
What's this?
It's temp V. One shot makes you a soup for 24 hours.
V1. This is the original recipe for Compound V, which is also what Homelander should have used his 11 herbs and spices line for.
Original recipe, all 11 herbs and spices.
But we'll let that slide because poor guy probably didn't know he wasn't given the good stuff. V1 is the formula that Friedrich Vought was developing even when he was back in Nazi Germany and helping his pals Hitler and Goebbels with their genocide of the Jews. As a revolutionary geneticist, Hitler made him the chief physician of the Dachau concentration camp, where Vought tested the earliest iterations of Compound V on prisoners of war. In many ways, he's like a combination of Reinhard Heydrich and Josef Mengele, because he had the final solution mentality and a character arc that will put Mengele's moniker of the Angel of Death to shame. Vought likely spent close to a half a decade experimenting on those confined within Dachau, and in that time period, dozens, if not hundreds, of his lab rats were killed. Over time, he perfected his initial formula and injected his wife, Clara Rissinger, with it, who went on to become Liberty and then Stormfront. After realizing that the Third Reich was doomed to fail because of Hitler's epic mismanagement of German resources, Vought defected to America, where he immediately found himself in a position of power because, while Oppenheimer was struggling with the atomic bomb, Friedrich had already field tested a version of V. This is what the series calls V1, and what we refer to as immortality juice. Since Vought was a geneticist, it's safe to assume that his formula, once administered, would alter a person's genetic code down to the cellular level. V1 gave people two types of power sets. The first was an overall increase in all their physical stats like strength, speed, and durability. This varied from subject to subject, of course, because we've seen Stormfront getting burnt to a crisp, whereas Soldier Boy can literally eat bullets. But overall, V injections increase a person's inherent physical abilities, in addition to reducing or outright eliminating cellular degradation. That's the primary reason why Soldier Boy, Stormfront, and Bombsight in Season 5 look exactly the same several decades ago. Their cells don't degrade, so unless someone more powerful than them takes their lives, they just keep on living forever. The second set of powers is that which manifests in a person on an individual level, such as Stormfront's lightning manipulation and flight. Soldier Boy didn't get additional powers, but it's possible that the reason he was the strongest soup alive was because that was his additional power. His physical stats were through the roof, even for a soup. So, we imagine that his case was more of a basics taken to the extreme. V1 was clearly meant to be given to adults, because his first successful test subject was his own wife, and his second and most popular test subject was a guy called Ben from Philly. But there could have been complications involved with the process, seeing as soups didn't become a dime a dozen until the second version of V was introduced. From 1945 to 1985, soups were being created, yes, but their numbers weren't nearly as large as they are today. And that's probably because the process of transformation was riskier than advertised. Even Captain America didn't become the world's first super soldier because of Erskine's formula alone. Howard Stark's Vita Rays played a key role in stabilizing his transformation. So, it's possible that Friedrich Vought had to use similar methods to ensure success. It's important to note that every person we know of that has been given V1 is white, because that tracks with Vaught's personal ideology. Though he betrayed the Nazi regime, he didn't betray their philosophy. And he most likely was trying to create an army of immortal white gods on Earth with his original formula. We expect that to be a major plot point in the upcoming prequel spin-off show, Vought Rising, because most of its cast members that we've seen already are white and were all given their V injections after reaching adulthood. Vought must have thought that because he created the men and women that defined the first generation of soups, he was entitled to their absolute loyalty. But then he saw how unstable Soldier Boy was, as well as the rest of his peers. And though we don't know whether he gave his wife explicit permission to go mingle with other men, the fact that Soldier Boy and Liberty started Herogasm must have given Frederick some sort of pause. Supes weren't the pure gods that he'd imagined they would be. They were just as flawed as humans, if not more. Plus, with the civil rights movement gaining traction in the 60s and 70s, he couldn't keep his formula's administration restricted to white folks. He needed to diversify to keep up with changing times. Yet, at the same time, he also probably didn't want to make other lesser races, quote-unquote, immortal. This, combined with his observations on how superpowers increased debauchery in his initial test subjects, it's most likely the reason Vought got to working on a new formula for Compound V, which is what all the supes of the current generation have. V2. V2 is what most people who end up becoming supes get, and this change most likely took place either in the 70s or the 80s, considering most of Payback got V2. How do we know this? Well, it's simple. Apart from Soldier Boy, all members of Payback aged in a natural way. Crimson Countess, Gunpowder, and the TNT twins were all middle-aged people by the time we saw them in the series. And though Swatto died fighting the Sandinistas, RIP, he would have been middle-aged too if he had made it to the modern era. For any sort of drug or chemical, the development phase doesn't stop once the product is produced. It's a lifelong process, and that's especially true for something like Compound V, which experienced several complications with its first version. Soldier Boy, Stormfront, and their first soup teams were the ones who survived Dr. Vaught's V injections. We don't know how many didn't, so clearly stabilization was as big of a concern as introducing mortality. But that was eventually achieved with the creation of V2, and that's thanks to the invention of intravenous medical procedures, specifically in vitro fertilization. Vaught's scientists realized the most stable way to introduce V into the bodies of prospective supes was by exposing them to the compound in the blastocyst stage. So, using Godolphin University as a cover organization, they set up an IVF clinic where they gave out free treatments to create new supes. Over time, Vought also started approaching other prospective mothers with the promise of turning their children into superheroes. And they probably did this by accessing their medical records, because that's what we would have done. It's also hinted that by the time the series began, Vought had figured out how to give V to newborn children, because that baby with the blue laser eyes from season 1 was hooked up to an IV drip whose fluid was suspiciously blue. V2 maintained a majority of the original V formula's chemical composition. It still made supes invulnerable to guns, it still gave them abilities like flight, super speed, and all kinds of things. But because it was mostly injected into developing children, the process of manifestation was altered. While a V1 injection would have given the subjects superpowers almost instantly, V2 had a bit of a delayed onset factor. While Laser Eye Baby was able to access his powers as an infant, the Deep didn't realize that he had powers until he went to a restaurant as a kid and started hearing the lobsters speak. Kate Dunlap didn't realize she had powers until one day she had enough of her younger brother's antics and told him to go away and never come back. The most likely cause behind this change is probably the fact that every child's physical and mental development is different, and the biochemical trigger for conscious V2 activation varies from person to person. There does seem to be a genetic component involved with regards to who's capable of surviving such an injection and who isn't. For instance, Kimiko and Kenji were brother and sister, so the Shining Light Army theorized that they'll both get powers if given V, and they were right. In fact, most siblings we've seen in the show are superpowered, which means that their genetic makeup played a key role in determining their eligibility. Moreover, if an individual with V in their veins has a child, it's also possible for the child to receive the same powers as their parent. Both Polarity and Andre have the same powers as well as the issues that came with them. And Maverick, who's perpetually invisible in Gen V, got his abilities from his dad Translucent. Well, technically he got his powers from the V that he received, but his abilities were predetermined. Kimiko and Kenji didn't manifest the same powers, likely because they were siblings with different chromosomal makeups, for we've only seen the direct ability transfer in male-to-male inheritance. But the fact that Huey's dad got V after he did, and he still received the same abilities, at least confirms that the transference of soup abilities is tied to the Y chromosome. As for the powers themselves, well, the abilities one gets seem to be either completely random or driven by the subject's personality and desires. Because we've seen several supes in Gen V having powers that no one in their right minds would have wanted as children. Like Black Hole's black hole in his black hole. Bushmaster's ability to, well, control her bush. But then there are characters like A-Train, who lived a hard life in a harsh environment before manifesting his super speed. which seems to be a direct cause of his desire to run away from all kinds of hardship. So it's difficult to quantify exactly what makes someone manifest the powers they do get, both from V1 and V2. But we can safely say that if someone with those formulas in their veins has children, they can pass down genes that will give said children similar abilities, if not the same one. This brings us to the other change that was made in the transition from V1 to V2, which was the introduction of mortality, because V2 subjects will eventually age and die. Cellular degradation doesn't stop in their body. They age like normal humans, and barring extreme violence and any acts of God, they will perish naturally. This was done most likely to ensure that even if a soup went rogue, they won't become a permanent problem for Vought. And considering Frederick's supremacist ideals, we're pretty sure he didn't want to turn someone without his skin color into an immortal god. It looks like the trade-off for this alteration was the destabilization of V2 caused in test subjects that weren't children, because we know for a fact that Sage Grove was established to counteract that exact problem. The people held in Sage Grove were given V2, and they were all adults, which is why they were so closely monitored and often went insane. V2 doesn't seem to take to adults with fully mature genetic makeups as easily as V1 did. And of course, there are exceptions to the rule. Huey's dad, Butcher, Cindy, Love Sausage, they were all injected with V2 as adults, and they didn't experience any adverse effects. But that's why they're called exceptions, because a majority of adult test subjects either died or went so crazy that Vought assigned a lamplighter to Sage Grove as the cleanup crew for failure. Even today, if Vought injected someone with V2, they'd get better results from doing it in the blastocyst stage, and that seems to be the price of trying to remove biological immortality from their forbidden blue raspberry. So these are the two V formulas that Vought created for general use. V1 was the prototype, V2 became the mass release product that's given us hundreds, if not thousands of soups in the modern era. But there are two other versions of V in the show as well, and one of them might not be what you're expecting it to be. Thomas Godolkin's V, the Odessa project. Many websites and news outlets will tell you what Thomas Godolkin took to give himself the most powerful telepathic abilities seen in this franchise was V1, but they're wrong. Well, they're not exactly right, to be more precise, because that formula's base could have been V1. That would explain why Godolkin seemingly hadn't aged after Marie restored his body, but it was also connected to Project Odessa, which was established with a specific purpose, to create a truly godlike soup whose powers would be uncontested. That scene where Godolkin and his fellow researchers injected themselves with V in 1969 probably took place before V2 was perfected. That is possible. But that doesn't change the fact that the Odessa project was completely different from regular V injections Vought was using even after Godolkin disappeared, because it was. It was a specialized version of V that was supercharged in the sense that it was engineered to maximize power as much as possible. Homelander was created using Soldier Boy's DNA, and while he does seem to have inherited his father's extreme physical durability, he can also fly, has laser eyes, X-ray vision, and a whole host of other powers that Ben didn't have. The fact that him and Marie Moreau are the only survivors of Odessa should tell you that whatever they were using on those test subjects wasn't the regular stuff, and their powers are all the proof we need. Marie literally revived her sister from death, for Christ's sake, and when her mom was given the Odessa V, somehow her infertility reversed because we know for a fact she didn't go to Godolkin University for another injection and still conceived Annabeth. So Odessa V is real, and the dozens of test subjects who died are living proof of that. Pardon the oxymoron. Plus, even in Thomas Godolkin's case, he was the only one who survived that experimental version of Odessa V, because all his research buddies died gruesome and horrifying deaths shortly after injecting themselves with the same thing. In our opinion, this version of V was heavily modified and engineered to deliver peak results, and that's why there's such a low return on investment for it. In fact, Stan Edgar shut down Project Odessa when he saw that Marie Moreau didn't manifest her powers upon birth like Homelander, which further validates our belief. The compound V used during this top secret program was exceptionally advanced, and considering both Homelander and Marie age normally, it likely shifted from using V1 to using V2 as its base. Still, the fact remains that Odessa V was different from regular V, and that's why we're giving it its own category in this video. V24. The final and perhaps the most dangerous version of Compound V is V24, or Temp V. As the name suggests, this formula gives people superpowers for 24 hours, and it's different from its predecessors in that when adults take it, they don't immediately explode or start going crazy. It was created because Stan Edgar realized that soups as a whole were a liability, and he wanted to get out of the soup business. His aim was to make Vought International as a legitimate pharmaceutical and defense company, and the actions of soups always blocked that second half of his ambition. So he decided that he was going to cut them out entirely and create a formula that didn't give people superpowers for their entire lives. It gave them superpowers for just the right amount of time. V24 was meant to be given to drafted soldiers, and while its cost was way too high, the one thing the US government doesn't lack is money. Even if they had to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to empower a single unit, they'd spend it, because it would introduce the military discipline to superpowers that's been lacking in soups all along. V24 is the only formula that we can safely say gives a person superpowers that are based on their personalities and desires. When Butcher took it, he got laser eyes like Homelander, and Huey's teleportation powers were probably manifested due to his deep desire to outclass the fastest man alive. Sadly, because of its experimental nature, this strain of Compound V came with a horrifying side effect, and that was the development of multiple massive malignant brain tumors in a user that consumed it anywhere between 3 to 5 times. This was confirmed through symptoms like migraines and extreme nausea, both of which Butcher experienced even before he took it the 6th time. And his last use of V24 pretty much sealed his fate. He's been given 18 months to live with inoperable cancer curdling through his brain. And Vought can't even perfect the formula anymore because after V's existence was exposed to the world, they stopped all testing and development. And speaking of cancer, we haven't mentioned a couple of side effects that even the garden variety V can have on users, which are addiction and redirection. Both A-Train and Popclaw were V addicts in Season 1, and while it didn't seem to enhance their abilities in any meaningful way, it did enlarge A-Train's heart to the point where he had to stop running all the time unless he wanted to die. That's what happened to Butcher when he took V2 after his cancer diagnosis, because, like most common folk, he believed that V could have healed his disease. But it's not a healing potion. It's something that alters human genetics, and healing can be one of the powers it bestows to those who take it, but it's not a built-in guarantee. So, as bad as addiction and redirection are, they don't hold a candle to the insane side effects of V24, which is why it's the most dangerous version of Compound V from a fatality aspect, because using it too much can actually end up killing you. But as for every type of Compound V and effects and impacts they have on people who consume them, this is pretty much everything you need to know. Tell us your thoughts on them in the comments below, because we're very interested in hearing what you guys think. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content from the Boysverse. We'll see you guys real soon in yet another video. So until then, stay safe. And if someone walks up to you with Gatorade color liquids and vials, don't even look at them. Just run the other way.